Okay, well, I do have a lot to present to you guys, and I do want to make sure that we get through most of it. So thank you for coming here this evening. It's almost evening, right? I know this is a long day, and so I'm going to do my very best to keep this interesting and engaging, and I would really appreciate if you would ask some questions. So I'm going to ask you some questions too, and I'm going to start off by, well, just pointing out the topic is on sustainability and ESG. And I put in here for the staffing industry, but actually it's really for any industry. It's applicable to all industries. So, but I will point out some things that are especially applicable to the staffing industry. So my name is Shea Cunningham, and I am the Director of Sustainability for ASGN Incorporated. And ASGN is an IT consulting and staffing company. We have about 10,000 employees. We are publicly held. And I'm not sure if you know of Apex. Apex is our largest commercial brand. ECS is our brand that works with the federal government. Then we have smaller brands, Creative Circle, Cyber Coders, and GlideFast. And we're mostly in the United States. We're also in Canada and Mexico, a little bit in Europe, a little bit in India. And I've been around. I basically was brought in to create the ESG program for the company. So I've been there almost 3 years. So we've been working from scratch to what I'm about to present to you today. So I'm going to see, hopefully this works. I'm going to advance the slides. Okay, great. So I think you guys see on some of your tables, there's a QR code. I was requested to point out, like, make sure you rate this afterward, and you get, that actually creates a donation to a local organization, which is great. And it'd be great if you can do the gold star, of course, rating. Thank you. Okay. So my next slide. So first, before I get into the next slide, raise your hand if your firm is a private firm, if it's privately held. Okay, that's almost all of you. So raise your hand if your firm is publicly traded. Okay, we got 1 in the room, 2 in the room. Awesome, okay. So raise your hand if you work with the federal government, if you have a contract with the federal government. Okay, good to know. And then what about with the state government? Anybody have, okay, a lot of you, so this is good. And raise your hand if you already have an ESG initiative of some sort in place. All right, nice to know. And raise your hand if you are doing an annual report, ESG report. Okay, super. All right, so without further ado, we're going to go into the next slide. And I am going to basically just do a real brief overview. Come on in. And sort of a 101 of sustainability and ESG. Then I'm going to kind of just review the kind of primary ESG drivers and why in particular staffing. And then I'm going to give you sort of an overview of the journey that we have done here at ASGN in terms of our ESG programming and tracking and reporting. And then I'm going to give you kind of a checklist on how to develop and define your strategy. So, pop quiz. Okay, let me know, please raise your hand if you know what ESG is. Okay, can you tell everybody what it is? Yes. That's correct. It means environmental social governance. I'll go a little bit more in depth on that. Exactly. And what about sustainability? Can anybody describe what sustainability is? Okay, so that sustainability basically is the act of maintaining ecological balance while avoiding the depletion of natural resources. It also is about supporting each other and our communities socially and economically. So it's basically, in the business world, it's often referred to as the triple bottom line, also the 3 Ps, people, planet, profit. And I like this visual of the 3-legged stool because it's not, because oftentimes people think of sustainability as just the environment, but it's not. It's also about, the impacts on the people and also on the business, the financial aspects. Now, and that's very similar with ESG because they basically are very similar to each other. ESG is basically a framework that's rooted in sustainability. And it's a framework for businesses to assess and report on environmental, workforce, and ethical issues, and other industry-specific matters. So in 2021, about 70% of privately held firms had some sort of sustainability or ESG initiative in place, and over 90%, and as of last year, over 90% of S&P 500 companies publish ESG annual reports. All right, now I want to address the elephant in the room. Who has heard about the ESG backlash? Okay, couple. So there is a very vocal minority that's been pushing back on ESG programming and reporting because they don't think that the environmental and social issues are material to the business world. But the reality is the cat's already out of the bag. We're not going back. They're the clients. They're clients like the major corporations and the Fortune 500. They are doubling down on their ESG requirements for companies that are publicly traded in particular, but also just any large suppliers of theirs. There's also looming regulations at the state level and at the federal level. And so it's not going away. And I think I have here a quote from Forbes magazine. ESG measures significantly affect our ability to attract investors, raise capital, hire new talent, retain our most valued employees, and nurture public trust in our brands. So now we're going to get into kind of the why environmental sustainability is important. So you can see here that this graph illustrates that since the 1980s, each decade has been hotter than the last. And if we don't cut our emissions, and we don't get going now, we are on track for what is 4% Celsius or 7.5% Fahrenheit degrees warmer than the pre-industrial era. And that basically is going to result in extreme disruptions, massive disruptions and damage and dislocation across communities across the entire globe. So this is a pretty heavy topic. It's not an easy, light topic, but this is the reality. This is the science. In fact, the destructive, and so just pointing out here, the light blue shows that if we work on substantial emissions reductions, we can keep things, we can minimize the situation. So it's still under our control. We still have the possibility to do it. We just need to get down to it. So this next slide illustrates the destructive impacts of climate change that are more severe than the climate scientists have originally predicted. So I think we've all, if we haven't personally experienced it, we've seen it across the globe and very close to home as well. The extreme weather events are more frequent. They include prolonged droughts, fast-moving fires, desertification, massive storms, and floods. So this trend is really already disrupting businesses and business supply chains globally. Climate change is already affecting the number of billable days a company has in a year, and businesses will continue to be increasingly impacted until we reduce our collective emissions. Okay, so this not so funny slide here shows that another issue that we have is that we create too much waste, and that's kind of our society is just, there's especially disposable single-use plastics. So this is not a very fun fact that if we continue as business as usual, by 2050, plastics in the ocean will begin to outweigh fish in the ocean. So we really need to pay attention to this and do our best to start reducing our waste, especially plastic waste. All right, next slide. Okay, so the primary ESG drivers for businesses, starting with employees. So more and more employees want to work for employers that are engaged in philanthropy and climate action. This is a great way to attract and retain employees and reduce turnover, which of course means that it costs, you've got some cost savings there. There's also, in terms of customers and clients, there's a mounting, as I mentioned, mounting requests and requirements that are coming down the pipeline. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the looming regulations as well. And in terms of major clients, they're now requiring ESG disclosures as part of their supply chain assessment and planning, and are beginning to expect their suppliers to do the same. So we're working on that now because we're being told that that's the next thing to focus on. So you can see here rating agencies. These are the three biggies that rate companies on their ESG programming. That includes MSCI, ISS, and Sustainalytics. And in terms of investors, they're really hot on ESG risk management. That is their focus. And it's because their supply chains are starting to go wonky because of all of the global weirding and strange and extreme events that are happening around the world. So the ESG disclosure for that is called the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures, or the TCFD. So that is something that is also specifically the backbone or the base of what the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, is currently proposing. At any day now, basically, they said October, we're already in October, that could become in effect for all publicly traded businesses. And so I'll get a little bit deeper into that on a forthcoming slide. And I also just wanted to mention that just last month in California, where I hail from, California Senate Bill 253 just passed, bless you, which requires companies with greater than $1 billion in annual revenues to disclose their greenhouse gases. It needs to be third-party certified, and they also need to set emissions reduction targets. So things are starting to heat up at the state level as well. Okay, so next slide here. Oh yeah, and I also want to mention the federal government. In the last couple of years, the federal government has committed to becoming net zero by 2050. So you can imagine that's helping to push the renewable energy on the grid. So thankfully that's moving ahead, although not as fast as I'd like it to move and other people would like it to move, but we are getting there. More and more utilities are offering renewable energy on the grid. The Department of Defense is ramping up investments in renewable energy. And in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, there's been an executive order this past year to ensure that the federal government is reflecting the full diversity of the American people. And also now, as of last year, contractors with more than $50 million in contracts must disclose the emissions, just like the SEC, and set emission reduction targets. All right, and so this is kind of more focused on the staffing industry, but I've already kind of mentioned some of this stuff. So why is ESG important to the staffing world? In particular, as I mentioned, client requirements, they're coming down the pipeline. If you don't have them yet, they're on their way. This is a great recruiting tool. It's a great way to retain employees because more and more, as I mentioned, employees want to see this in their employers. This is a great way to engage your employees as well. I'm going to go a little bit further down the line. I'm going to talk about employee engagement groups. And then also it's a great way to attract awards and to bring attention to the great work that you're doing through ESG awards. Okay, so now I'm going to get into ASGN's ESG journey. Basically, we started with benchmarking our industry peers, like our top 10 peers. And we benchmark them on like policies, ESG-related policies, DEI programming, board diversity, and greenhouse gas disclosures and targets, reporting frameworks, which I will show you a little bit more in a future slide. And there are several of them. There are about 6 biggies. And so we, wanted to see which frameworks were our peers were reporting to, and then also looked at their ESG ratings and compared those. Then once we kind of got that together, we engaged the board, and we already actually had board interest in moving forward on developing an ESG program. So we got that support. We performed a materiality assessment. That's kind of one of the 101s, one of the first things you want to do when you start creating an ESG program. That'll be our next slide. And then we established some goals and targets. We began tracking and reporting. We published our first annual ESG report in 2020. We have accomplished a few of our short-term goals already. We are making progress on our longer-term targets, and we are staying informed of trends, and we are committed to continual improvement. Okay, so raise your hand if you've ever heard of a materiality assessment. Okay, a few of you, great. Okay, so this is a materiality matrix. This is basically the kind of the essence of sort of the report that comes out of a materiality assessment. A materiality assessment is essentially a survey of your internal and external stakeholders on ESG to define the ESG priorities for the company. So on the y-axis, we are the internal stakeholders or employees, and on the x-axis are our external stakeholders, which are our clients and our investors. So in the upper right-hand quadrant of the matrix, that's where the kind of the highest priorities come together, coalesce between the internal and external stakeholders. And we did this in 2021, so we're due to do another materiality assessment next year, because it's now sort of best practice to do kind of refresh your materiality matrix or every 2 to 3 years. And so, any questions about this, by the way? Since we're such a small group, I do want to once again just let you know you can raise your hand at any time and we can just have a dialogue. Yeah, that's a good question. That's it was based on the survey results. So that was one of the least what do you call it? I mean, like in terms of results, that was just lower on the spectrum. But that could be totally different because we're going to do it again this summer. So I expect things are going to be changing quite frankly. Quite frankly, I think we're going to see some movement here, and I think we all kind of know like this is nascent. You know, the ESG world is really evolving rapidly and changing. Any other questions about the matrix?
I can just share on my day with AMN Healthcare. We did ours last year, and it was fairly similar, except corporate giving wasn't on there.
Okay. Okay.
Because we're more in the healthcare space.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. Okay, great. Super. So, okay, and by the way, this is in our ESG annual report, and so we do, we submit them usually in June, and we also have it on our website, so, feel free to take a look and ask any questions at any time. Okay, next slide. So this is basically our accomplishments that we made over this past year. And that we highlighted in our ESG report. So primarily in terms of environmental responsibility, we established a carbon emissions reduction plan, and we began working on our emission reduction goal of 55% per the 2019 baseline by 2030. So that's very specific. So we've got our work cut out for us. And I'm going to show you some of our progress. And then in terms of the social dimension, social responsibility in our workforce, we managed to achieve 40% diversity in senior level executive positions ahead of our goal of 2025, so I'm very proud of that. In terms of governance and data security, because we are an IT consulting firm, so that is our kind of main focus, industry specific focus, we've expanded our ESG reporting frameworks, as well as achieved some certifications regarding on data specific systems. And then in terms of our commitments that we're working on now for this next year, we are beginning to implement our carbon emissions reduction plan. We are doing this through creating a sustainable commuting pilot for our employees. So we're going to be incentivizing, we're focusing on Apex's and headquarters and ASGN's headquarters in Virginia, where we have about 500 people. and we're going to be focusing on incentivizing people to carpool, to drive EVs, to take public transportation if that's possible, and if they're close enough to walk or ride their bikes. And we're going to embed incentives into that as well. We are also yes. No. Oh, yeah, we do. So, sure, yeah, that's a good question. So we do have, most people are working hybrid schedule. So most people are coming in anywhere between 1 to 3 to 4 days a week. And so we do, in terms of accounting for, we still have to account for the emissions from their home. Like we work from home emissions, we have to calculate that. But the commuting, because people have not, obviously they stopped in 2020 and started trickling back in 2021, you'll see it in a future slide, that really did reduce our carbon emissions dramatically. And so now what we need to do is hold them down as much as we can. That's why we need to get this commuting pilot underway. So did that answer your question? Okay, good. Sure. All right. And then, yeah, please, yeah.
So I'm assuming that's for your corporate employees. Are you challenged or have you contemplated with expanding the scope to the staff that we assign and trying to measure their?
Very good question. Very good question, yes. Yeah, we're going to have to get to that point, but we're not quite there yet.
So we're mostly in the travel nurse business.
Yep.
We're trying to measure airfare versus how many,
Yes.
where they live, where we put them to live.
Right.
Hospitals.
Yeah, it's a major challenge. And you know what? I'm just like rethinking again. With ECS, our federal government agency, we are including them because it's just the way it is complicated. You can see, if I go back, you can see, whoops, stretch break is next. It actually shouldn't be FTEs, that's a mistake. It should be internal employees. So we categorize our employees as internal versus external. And ECS has all of their employees are considered internal. So it's kind of a hybrid between the two. But yeah, there's a lot to it. So good question. Okay, and then I just want to mention, the business travel guidelines. That is a little bit of the cart before the horse because we don't really have too many electric airplanes yet or hydrogen-fueled airplanes. But we do have airlines that are committing to doing it and on a pretty aggressive time schedule. Like Alaska Airlines in particular comes to mind. They already have some in their fleet, and so as we get closer to 2030, there should be a significant portion of airlines that will have that as an option. So we're working on that. I mean, we're not working on that, but we're working on raising awareness and then also reminding people that we don't, the days are really bygone days of us needing to fly to, to have a quick meeting, because we have the virtual capabilities of just doing it, with a computer at home. So I'm pretty heartened that we will be able to maintain that as well. Now, in terms of our social aspects, we are implementing the WEPS, which is the Women Empowerment Principles, which is a United Nations initiative, and we're doing this company-wide. I'll go a little bit into that in a few minutes. And then governance section, we are establishing an enterprise risk management program because that's part of the SEC regulations that are going to come down the pipeline at any moment. So we need to prepare for that. And in particular, climate-related aspect. It's not just enterprise risk, but climate-related risks. Okay, everybody, let's just take a moment, if you wouldn't mind. Stand up. Maybe stretch your arms overhead and then say hi to your neighbor. Say hi to your neighbor. Maybe introduce yourselves. Maybe do a little twist to the right. Little twist to the left. Oh, get the energy flowing. All right. Thank you for humoring me. Okay. Awesome. Sit back down. All right. Okay. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, I did finally get one of those watches that reminds you to stand up or, sit or, get moving. I think that is important as we move along in life. So, okay. All right. So this is continuing the journey of ESG's journey, or ASGN's ESG journey. includes the membership into the United Nations Global Compact. Are you guys familiar with that agency? Okay, got a few heads nodding. So, so that is basically the forum for corporations to engage with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of these goals, and when a company, and it doesn't have to be a publicly traded company, it can be a very small private company that's open to all companies of all types. The idea is that the company aligns with at least one or several of the goals. So ASGN aligns with gender equality, reduced inequalities, and that's basically, we worked directly with a UNGC on they call it Sustainable Development Goal Accelerator program, and we combined the two because we kind of feel like, diversity should be including women of all colors, and so that's why we're focusing more on diversity than just gender. And then of course we're also, because we're a type of firm that we are focused on health and well-being of our employees, internal and external, and our communities, obviously on decent work and economic growth, innovations, and climate action. Yes, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good question, and yes, and that's kind of it's very similar to the ESG backlash that I mentioned. So there is some impact that's happening. We are holding the line because we know that it is something that's, I think it's more political, unfortunately. So I think it's gonna. My feeling is that it's going to, go away eventually, but there has been a little bit of a scaling back. But as I mentioned, clients, investors, and employees, all want to see things move forward, and there's a lot of, I think, just escalating pressures to do so. Yeah, so I would say just, I don't know, just keep on keeping on. So, yeah. So, okay, now this is basically our emissions, the ASGN's, and it's scope 3 emissions. By the way, I don't know if you know about the scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 3 basically implies that the company, we don't own anything, basically. We lease all of our buildings, and we're minor tenants in most of those buildings, so it makes it a little bit tougher for us to be able to reduce our emissions, but we're still going to work on it. We're going to work on it through leases as we negotiate new leases and identify those utilities in their local areas that have renewable energy, for instance. But I just want to show you here, this is like the sources. So we have our sources, our building footprint, our business travel, our employee commuting, our office procurement, and then, as I mentioned, work from home emissions as well. And you can see the big drop after 2019, 2020, it was because the traveling basically came to a halt, right? And so now we're starting to tip upward. So now that's why we have to double down on our ESG, programming to incentivize, more smarter travel, basically, and commuting, and also renewable energy. So this is our climate emissions reduction plan, kind of our highlights of it. So as I mentioned, with our building energy, we are working on increasing the numbers of our buildings that are powered by renewable energy. And so obviously, LEED buildings like this building here, that's a way to go, but it's not necessarily the only way to go. I think it's better to be in a building that you can purchase renewable energy from than it is a LEED building that is not powered by renewable energy. And then in terms of renewable energy credits or RECs, that's something that is just sort of a last resort. Like if we get to 2030 and we can't quite reduce directly, then we will look for renewable energy credits and invest in those. And then transportation is the second big chunk, as I mentioned, working on the guidelines for business travel and also employee commuting. And then procurement, we're just starting to develop a sustainable purchasing policy. Actually, we developed the policy, we've created that, but now we're developing the program, a sustainable supply chain program. That's going to start off as basically a survey of our top suppliers and survey them on like what are they doing, if anything, in terms of ESG. What are they doing their greenhouse gas inventory? If so, is it third-party audited? Do they have emission reduction targets in place? Do they have any sort of DEI programming in place? That sort of thing, just to kind of assess where they are. And then the next step would be to, to do what we can to partner with them to help lift them up. And then employee engagement is also very critical to our ESG journey. So as the director of sustainability for the company, one of my main responsibilities is to engage with the employees so they are aware of what we're doing and how they can be a part of the solution, in particular because so many people still work from home and will continue to work from home. And for instance, we have a survey that we're putting out in just a couple of weeks that surveys them on the type of cars, or how many days a week they come to work, what type of car they drive, do they carpool, do they ever take public transportation, and then also do they have renewable energy like on site? If not, are they able to purchase it through their utility? And if so, what percentage? Bless you, by the way. What percentage can you purchase? Because oftentimes the utility will give you like 50%, 75, and to 100. So just to wrap our heads around, like, to estimate, but also to raise awareness. And I will show you in another slide in terms of employee engagement. We have a lot of different employee resource groups and employee community groups that are active across our companies, which it's very heartening to see. Okay, and this is just a list of basically 13 ESG policies that we created over the past few years. And these are all on our website. And basically, they're legally binding. And I'm happy to see that, that we really, and when I put it all together, I'm like, oh, wow, we really have made some progress over these past few years. And then the reporting frameworks, these are the major ones. The CDP is the Carbon Disclosure Project. That focuses on the greenhouse gas, the carbon footprint of the company. The TCFD, as I mentioned, that's the investor-focused disclosure that they're most interested in. It's focused on ESG risks and risk management, specifically on the environmental side. And then S&P Global has their corporate sustainability assessment, which is very, very comprehensive, and it's very similar to the Global Reporting Initiative, or the GRI. So, and then SASB is actually one of the more minor ones, but that one is holding strong. There was a question earlier about, like, is there just like one rating scorecard? There's not. There's many, many of them. I do think that eventually things are going to be moving toward standardization and probably fewer, but I think we still have a few more years before we get there. Yes? Very good question. When we first reported, we realized we did not answer that question in terms of like what our scope 1 and 2 are, but we realized we got dinged on that because it's 0. So now for the second time around, we put 0 in those 2 fields, and then we're like, okay, great, you reported on that. So we don't get dinged on it but there are definitely, kind of like, well, really, you don't have any control over your emissions? Like, yes, we do, but we just have less control, so it's harder for us. And so we're not shirking the responsibility. We are still, working on reducing the emissions, whether or not they're scope 1, 2, or 3. Yeah, but that's a good question. Okay, so next slide. Any other questions on that? Okay, we're good. All right, so as I mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a critical part of the ESG program as well. And I'm happy that we brought on a DEI director this past year, so we work really closely together. She's amazing, and she's just created a pilot mentorship program, a pilot that was very successful. And then she's expanding that company-wide. And we are establishing a diversity and inclusion council, which I'm sitting on as well. And we also just did our first year of doing a pay equity audit. So we are moving right along in that space. And then this is the women's empowerment principles kind of in a nutshell. There are 7 principles, and I'm not going to get super in-depth in them, but if there are any questions about it, let me know. I mean, it's things like making sure that you have maternity leave and paternity leave in place, making sure that, there are the proper social safety and well-being programs in place, that sort of thing. So and not all of our companies in the family have the maternity leave, so we're working on making sure that everybody has them in place. So it's great progress to make for our employees. And then this, oh yes. I can't remember exactly, but I think it's still not enough from my perspective. I'm sure it's 6 weeks at a minimum, but it might be up to 3 months. Yeah, but feel free to reach back out to me afterward. So, okay, so this is an illustration of some of our employee resource groups, ERGs, and ECGs. ECGs stand for employee community groups across our companies. And so just to be clear, ERGs and ECGs are a little different from each other. ERGs are voluntary employee-led groups that support inclusivity in the workplace. ERGs promote a sense of belonging and support employees who share a common identity. And so these are things like 50 Forward, Black at Apex, a disability-focused one, families, pride, and women, et cetera. And then ECGs, employee community groups, are also voluntary groups, but they're based more on shared values, interests, perspectives, and goals. And that would include the one that's on the top there on the left-hand side, which is focused on environmental action, basically. That's for people who are age 50, like mid-range, but mid-career. Yeah, right. People who are over 50. Yes. Good question. Okay.
In your ERGs, do you allow allies to participate in those groups? People that may not identify with this support?
Very good question. Yes, absolutely. Yep. Okay. So again, just re-emphasizing that ESG is growing. The cat's out of the bag. We can't stuff it back in. Client surveys are evolving. I mean, they are very, very plentiful. I don't know how large your ESG team is for you guys, because the two of you have programs, but I think you probably are aware. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, another one. Like, there's dozens of them. So they're evolving and proliferating at a rapid clip. Also investor requirements, as I mentioned, the TCFD, the SEC regulations coming online, and the frameworks, as I mentioned, are continuing to develop. I've noticed that the GRI and the CSA, I thought they were really big frameworks, and they got even bigger this past year. So they're just adding questions. Yeah. So, okay, this brings me to, I'm not going to get too deep into this, but this is the SEC regulations that are going to happen any moment now. And that basically is the oversight of the climate-related risks by the board and by management. It's the identification of the risks, the likely impacts to the business and business model, and then processes for identifying these risks and integrating these risks into overall management systems across the company. And as I mentioned, it's focusing on climate-related risks, and that includes having to report on all scope 1 through 3 emissions. 3 emissions are if it is considered material, which it is for ASGN and most companies. And then also setting goals, target reduction goals and plans. Okay, so the lessons learned. These are basically my words of, of sort of wisdom for you guys. Don't overcommit because you may not be able to achieve and meet your goals. And you have to have time, like the SMART, like they need to be measurable. What is that? Actionable, time realistic, and time sensitive. Exactly. So, have you heard of the term greenwashing? Does anybody not know what greenwashing is? Okay. So greenwashing is basically like marketing. Yes, we're doing all these wonderful things for the environment, but you're actually not. You're just marketing that. So there's been quite a lot of that, as we've all seen, including Delta Airlines. I don't know if you saw in the news, but they were like, hey, we're a carbon neutral airline. And I was like, what? How is that possible? Well, they're like, oh, we do it through carbon offsets. So that's like, investing in forestry and that sort of thing. But there's a big lawsuit against them now because that's basically greenwashing. Because basically the way we have to deal with our emissions is directly reduce them in our business, and carbon offsets again is like a kind of an extra bonus that you do. It's not the way you address.
Carbon offsets start to taper off and go away. Is that because there's so many people running to that?
Yeah, I agree.
It's so sketchy.
Yes. Exactly, and that's part of the reason. Like we're like, I mean, not.
Do you think we may not even be talking about carbon offsets 5 years from now?
I think there's still going to be a market for carbon offsets because I don't know if you know about the term zero waste for actually like plastics and whatnot. Or it's about diverting 90% of your waste from the landfill. So 90%. So that's what net zero emissions is. It's 90%. So that 10% is often the hardest. Sometimes it's impossible to get, it pretty much is impossible. So that's where the carbon offsets are going to come to play. So I think that a lot of the more sketchy ones are going to fall away. Yeah, because there's just, as I mentioned, the third-party verification of the greenhouse gases. It didn't used to be that way, but now it is. Like, you can't just say, oh, here are my emissions. You need to have a third party verify those emissions. So it's harder to greenwash now, which is a good thing. Okay, and then my other word of wisdom is don't undercommit because you may lose current or potential clients. And we're seeing, as I mentioned, we're seeing this more and more now. Like, oh my gosh, like Walmart, and for instance, like I never thought Walmart would be like seriously, serious about their program, but they are, and so they're requiring all sorts of things, and so is Microsoft and Google, and many others actually, and so. And also just be nimble and ready to pivot because as we talked about, like it's just evolving very rapidly. Things are changing and growing, and I kind of liken it to the wild, wild west. So, be nimble and ready to pivot, and also it really takes a village. So we need to build for every ESG program. The best ones are ones that are built across the spectrum of the company, from the top down, so it's C-suite down to the boots on the ground people, HR, facilities, you name it. Like every aspect of the business, somebody needs to represent and be at the table to make it work. Okay, and then in defining your ESG strategy. So this is just, again, just kind of a checklist. So you want to obtain buy-in from the top. You want to begin your benchmarking, as I laid out. You want to conduct a materiality assessment of your internal and external stakeholders. You want to build a cross-company ESG team, as I just mentioned. You want to establish your short-term and then your long-term goals and targets. Again, they need to be specific and time-bound. And then you want to start tracking and reporting your progress at least on an annual basis. We're starting to track on a quarterly basis for certain things, but annually, we do an annual ESG report. And then consider, which frameworks you want to report to. And, you don't necessarily need to do them all. Depends on your business and your business model and your business size. I put EcoVadis in there because EcoVadis is, they focus on the supply chain. So we're considering using EcoVadis now because we're just getting so much pressure basically to really get our supply chain, understand our own supply chain, and make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep up with the requirements. Okay, so because this is 5:15 and it's almost happy hour time, I thought I would end on a lighter note. This is my personal sustainable cocktails checklist. So it's the do's and don'ts, and you can, as you guys know, you can download this and use it as you will, and please pass it on. So remember, no plastic cups, no disposable straws, go organic as much as you can. And then I'm also going to share with you my very favorite drink. This is the Hellfire Margarita, and I was actually addicted to bike riding. So that's my midlife crisis activity. And so I've joined this group, which I just tremendously am in love with. They're called the Climate Ride, and they're based in Missoula, Montana. And they do rides all around the world now. And these rides are like 3 to 6 day rides. And so I've done about 5 of them with them now. And this one was in Utah. So we're just riding all through Utah. It was so awesome. And in the middle of Utah, in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, is a Michelin star restaurant called the Hell's Backbone Grill and Farm. So awesome. And this, I think I might have had 3 of these, but normally like 2 is my limit. Exactly. So anyways, I highly recommend that restaurant and this drink. And now it's your time, well, just to remind you to rate this session. Hopefully you thought it was decent. And now, I'll keep it up. You want to take a picture? And now it's time for any questions that you have. Okay, should I do the microphone? Okay, hold on, I need to do the microphone. Okay, let's make sure it's working. How do you turn this sucker on? Wait, I got it. Hello? Okay. All right, coming on down. I'm going to pass you the microphone. There you go.
I would just love your thoughts. As you know, the annual ESG, or what used to be the CSR report, is a heavy lift every year. What do you think that is going to continue, or do you think the future is just a dashboard on our websites and we just maintain the data as we go and we don't have to cram it in once a year? Because it's expensive and it takes a lot of time.
Boy, you tell me. Yes, that's a really good question. I think that's an absolute possibility. I don't see that happening in the next year or 2 or 3, but I think that's a good possibility, because at the end of the day, having an auditable platform where you're collecting all your data and you can then quickly show your data real time, I think that is where we're heading. So yeah, I think you have your finger on the pulse, but I still think that we're going to annual reports, yes, for a while at least. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? I take questions about bike riding and margaritas too. The Climate Ride. I'm telling you, just support the group if you don't want. I have a Fuji. I mean, it's not the top of the line, and I kept telling myself I need to scale up. But I've had this same bike for 5 years now, and it's kind of like my friend. And I think I would feel bad about not. I'll always keep that bike. But yeah. Any other questions? Comments? Oh, great. Oh, wait. I have to give you the microphone.
Oh, thanks. Is there any kind of ranking or any kind of reporting on that's generally across the staffing industry on ESG and how one should be ranked versus, are there basic standards beyond what you're doing because you have clients that are requiring it? Or best practices or something?
Yes. Well, there's nothing in particular on ESG for the staffing industry, but in terms of knowing how well your peers are doing, is that kind of what you're interested in? That's the benchmarking. That's what needs to happen. You need to get somebody to benchmark and just kind of and look at your peers. Like I would pick the top 10 and then look at what kind of ESG related policies are in place, what kind of programming is in place, if any. What sort are they tracking their greenhouse gases? Do they have any targets and goals, that sort of thing? hopefully that's helpful. All right. Oh,
Most scores are typically public, like CDP, and then if you work with a consulting agency, they can help you with some other things as well too. But yeah, you can also look at their scores as well.
excellent point. Yes, that's true. So yeah, you just look at the MSCI, the ISS, the Sustainalytics. There's a few others, and then of course the actual. I mean, not everybody reports their CDP scores. A lot of companies keep them internal, and they only give them to like clients, but some. Okay. Ooh, that's news to me. Thank you for telling me that. So CDP, so CDP is, see, everything is changing. Like you got to be quick and nimble and just be, it's like not surprising. So so CDP, yeah, so there you go. Okay, anything else? Thanks for hanging in there with me. Appreciate it. Okay.